Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shades of Entrepreneurship. This is your host, Mr. Gabriel Flores. Today, I'm here with Aaron Rokstad. Aaron, how are we doing?
Doing wonderful, Gabriel. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for so much. Again, folks, I'm really excited about this one because Aaron is going to bring in a new topic for us. We're going to be talking about hostile takeovers. But one of the things that Aaron and his family have been going through in the power and energy sector, which is very unique as well. But before we get into all that, Aaron, go ahead and introduce yourself. Who is Aaron Rokstad?
Thank you. Well, I am the third generation of Rockstads in the power business, following in the footsteps of my grandfather, and then my dad, who was an entrepreneur and had his own company that he successfully started, grew, and sold. And I grew up around that entrepreneurship, in that environment. And I'm a Canadian, but now living in the U.S. And I've moved down to sunny San Diego, California, to continue to grow my business and scale it. So that was a move we made in the beginning of 2024, and couldn't be happier.
Folks, if you have not had an opportunity yet to check out their business, the Rokstad Power, it's freaking pretty cool. Check out their website and you'll see like these. I'm talking like true huge freaking power lines, all over the place. So it's pretty unique. But tell me, give us a little bit about that industry and what you're currently doing, and kind of give us a little backdrop of the business.
Sure. It is a wonderful industry in that it's one of those industries where people come home, they flip the light switch, they expect their power to come on. There's not a lot of thought given to how that works. And there is quite the infrastructure build that goes into shipping an electron from where it's generated to your iPhone or your light bulb. And that's what we do. We build the high voltage infrastructure and substations that transmit that power. And it's interesting because we are seeing an unprecedented demand for power, especially electric power, the advent of AI, data centers, EVs, and we're going through quite a transformation in this industry. And interestingly enough, from 2000 to 2025, there has been a doubling of linemen and resources in this industry. And some groups estimate that we are 50% short of where we need to be to tackle the upcoming infrastructure build.
That's incredible. And I got to tell you, I got a couple of friends that are, PGE linemen. So folks that are here in the Portland, Oregon area are familiar with PGE. And the interesting thing is those jobs, one, it takes a lot of training, a lot of kind of education and training to one, even get into the lineman industry. But two, it's also kind of, I would say not necessarily unsafe, but there are some areas where you got to kind of really be careful. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I know it's cliche, but safety is paramount. We are dealing with high voltage electricity up to 500,000 volts. And the issue with electricity is you can't see it. And a lot of our work practices, safety management systems are around managing that risk. And a lot of companies do it really well these days. There are a lot less serious incidents and fatalities in this industry that there were, a decade or two ago. We've by all means we have some room to go, but yeah, it is a very training intensive. It's not for everybody. Like you said, Mr. Gabriel, we're working under helicopters and at 300 feet elevation. It's not for the faint of heart, but those who get into it tend to love it. And I've seen a lot of linemen over the years with tattoos of different towers and work that they've done. They really wear it as a badge of honor.
You know, Tell me a little bit about the operation of kind of structure, because again, to your point, you mentioned you guys use helicopters. You're kind of going up. Think about, again, folks are listening. Think about a power line that is on top of like a mountain ridge of with all trees around it. And I would encourage you go to their website or check out the shadesofE.com. I'll have this stuff. Go ahead and subscribe to the newsletter. We'll have this information on after this call. But it's really talk about the logistics that goes into and what all do you need to actually get a power line up? Because I think that's something people probably don't really understand. That probably there's a lot of work behind the scenes.
There really is. There is a ton of planning because let's say, for example, you have a 10-mile long transmission line. So from point A to point B is 10 miles. You actually have 50 or 60 individual project sites along those 10 miles because you have a tower or a pole every, couple hundred, a couple thousand feet, something like that. Um, so, a 10-mile job, for example, it's 50 or 60 individual projects with their own access plan, their own clearing plan, their own environmental monitoring, archaeological investigations potentially. So yeah, it's definitely a challenging industry. We've seen a lot of people come into this industry, road builders, things like that are used to linear projects like that, and really struggle with the sort of pinpoint nature of where you land these tower sites and pole sites. It's not quite like building, shaving away the side of a mountain and building a road. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's technical and has its own challenges. But we've done projects where everything on the project has been flown in with a helicopter. There's no foot access or vehicle access. I mean, kind of literally people dropping lunch off by a helicopter to the guys in the middle of the day, on the top of a mountain ridge or something like that.
Yeah, that's crazy. Now, is there like, when because I'm thinking of like, power lines, just like you mentioned, roadwork power lines. There's, I would generally assume there's like kind of like a natural amount of space you're supposed to be, but it sounds like your guys' jobs, it's almost like every job is different.
Absolutely. Every job is different. And I think that's actually what the linemen love about it is the variety of work. No two jobs are the same. But I think you touched on something really interesting. So a lot of utilities, they have a common right of way where they will put a transmission line or multiple transmission lines. It's really difficult for them to procure additional right of way to say widen that right of way, for example, to put another transmission line in. So a lot of our work is actually going in and taking down older, less capacity transmission lines, sometimes while they're energized, and we have to rebuild an existing structure or tower right next to it or in line to keep the power on. Some of these, the power is so critical, it's keeping cities and the whole economy going,
Yeah.
but they need to increase their supply. And so that's a really interesting component of the job that, say, 30 years ago, it was much easier to procure right away and all of that stuff to create your space. But now they're having to be creative and either extend towers or rebuild in place.
So tell me how, tell me about the origin story about, because again, this folks that listen, this is a family owned business and it has been for, again, now 3 decades. I think, you mentioned. So tell me about the origins. How did your family kind of get into the power energy industry?
Yeah, it's a really cool story and something that I have a lot of pride in because it's such a great, humble beginning story. So my dad has nine, he came from a family of nine. He has seven sisters and one brother. And my grandfather, the Rokstad name is a Norwegian name. So he moved from Norway and landed in Western Canada and um, bounced around from job to job. Back then, there was work in the sawmills. There was a lot of natural resource extraction going on. Worked in some of the famous mines, Britannia Mine around Whistler, BC, and sort of fell into working for the utility through a friend of a friend, and that ended up being a great settling point for him. And they sort of moved around a lot, and so my dad tells me stories about him and his sisters and mom and dad growing up in a two-bedroom house with 11 people with one bathroom. And what's really cool about that is that my aunts and uncles from that side, a lot of them are entrepreneurs and have their own businesses and have done really well. And it's a really, resilient, even stubborn group. And so family reunions are interesting, but it's all love. So I think my dad saw that, and when he decided to get into business after trade school, It was a natural, the relationships with the utilities were there. And then, so in the early 80s is when he started his business, and he grew that business to be a very successful business, and sold it to the largest player in our industry. And that's sort of how I got started working for my dad before I started Rokstad Power in 2008. Because I sort of had this chip on my shoulder, I guess, when I was growing up, and said, all these linemen around me, I don't know if I want to be a lineman. I went to trade school to be a computer nerd and a computer science degree. And I ended up working for this software business, which was great. It took me around the world. I worked for it for 6 years. I worked in Singapore, Frankfurt, South Africa. I lived in Florida for a year. But I found myself during 9/11 in Singapore, was working for the software company there, and I couldn't get home. And I had just got engaged to my wife. My dad had just sold his business, and had all this working capital available to him. And I said, Dad, maybe it's time for me to get off the road and come work for you. And so that's what I did. I went and worked for him for 6 or 7 years, and decided I was going to keep the entrepreneurial spirit going, and I left to start Rokstad in 2008. I had $100,000 home equity line of credit on my house, and that was the seed capital to start the business.
How, I think that in itself is a bit of a nervous jump, right? Kind of going from something that has been consistent in the form of financial security, right? A job, working for your dad, to then taking your own personal savings, and basically saying, I'm going to bet my house. Talk about that transition, and kind of like what made you finally say, you know what, I think I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger and move forward with this.
I can remember the exact moment, Gabriel. I was having a conversation with my wife. I wouldn't be anywhere without the support of her, and her being my rock to lean on as go out and be an entrepreneur and chase dreams here, because as you know, it is sometimes a very lonely and thankless job. But the company that my dad had sold to had this continuing acquisition strategy, and they had rolled up all of the other power line businesses around us. And I really felt like I was trapped, in a sandbox. As I looked ahead, and maybe my dad would retire and I would step into that role, there wasn't a lot of other opportunity. And I came from this world or this environment of seeing the world, and the stuff that we were doing inside that business of my dad's was really great stuff. We had one project we did there where we built what's called a catenary structure up in a mine up in Alaska, where it was 3 miles from one mountain peak to the next mountain peak, and the mine had built a power line in the valley that kept getting taken out by avalanches and snow avalanches. And we put structures in that basically spanned that entire mountaintop to mountaintop, 600 feet over the valley floor. And that was the project of the year, and made front page news in a very important publication in our industry. And we weren't going to be able to do those wild and wonderful projects, and I just couldn't live with the thought of that. So I sat down with my dad and I said, I think I can go and do this on my own. And I remember the discussion like it was yesterday. He said, I hate to lose you, but absolutely, you need to go do this. And the rest is history. What's really funny about that, Gabriel, is 3 years after I started that business, and it really got some traction, and we were doing quite well in the first couple of years. My dad came to me and said, hey, I'm thinking about leaving my business. What do you think about partnering up? And I said, let's do it. And here we are.
Wow, that's a great story. It's almost like, a complete 360, pretty much, right? Your father kind of you become your father's employee, and then Dad becomes your employee. Now
Yeah,
you also kind of mentioned you know, little bit, you kind of briefly mentioned private equity. Love to
yes,
kind of hear, for better or for worse, would love to
sure,
kind of hear your perspective on private equity firms and how they're currently, because I hear, I do stocks, right? And so I kind of hear a lot about, these private equity firms absorbing, and even in the healthcare industry,
sure.
absorbing the healthcare hospitals. Tell me about your perspective, for better or for worse, on the private equity firms and how they're reshaping the power and energy industry.
Absolutely. Well, the thing about this industry is it's very capital intensive. And what I mean by that is, like any business, you have a working capital consideration. The great thing about this industry is the vast majority of regulated electric utilities that are our customers are AAA bond rating credit blue chip businesses. And there's sort of a 75 to 90-day DSO payment cycle for that. So pretty typical for a service business, an infrastructure business. But every crew that we put out on the road costs $1 million to tool up. And we've had over 140 crews running in this business at one point at our peak volumes. So it doesn't take a genius to do the math on that. And this is where I think private equity has helped shape this industry a little bit, in that if you rewind, let's say 20 years ago, I can't really think of too many private equity businesses that were involved in this business. But as the industry has grown, and there's a need for really large businesses in this space, and the typical family business, maybe like us, we are definitely an anomaly in that we're a very large family business in this space. A lot of the other family businesses, even if they've got decades of experience on us, haven't really had the scale that we have. And they'll go in and use their financial resources, I guess even some of their business acumen in terms of scaling and stuff like that, and really try to turn these businesses into, not if they're a regional business, try to turn them into a nationwide service provider. And so, even in my time, and I've been in this industry for around 22, 23 years now, I've seen my first $1 billion revenue business in that time. There were none back when I started. Now there's 10 that are doing over a
And a
billion
trillion,
dollars.
right? That with Apple.
Yeah. So it's really amazing to see that. And um, private equity, I think, is really gaining steam and traction as a not only an exit strategy but a scaling strategy for founders and other owners of businesses in this space.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more in regards to the kind of general philosophy of venture capital as well. And when you think of private equity, there is the mentality to kind of scale and sell, right? The premise of it is they're investing. So folks that are listening that own a small business, when you're thinking of your exit strategy, it's important to kind of understand, what the private equity and venture capital kind of world is. They do want to kind of get a return on investment on their investment. So sometimes that might be scaling the business, that might be slimming down the business, that might be completely reformulating the business. And so as an owner, sometimes, unfortunately, you kind of lose a lot of your power and say when you start bringing in private equity. So just kind of be mindful of that. However, if you're able to do it correctly, as Aaron is mentioning, there is opportunity for it to continue to help be beneficial. Now, Aaron, let's kind of talk about you have an earlier family business as well, and I think this is the topic I'd really love to hear about as well. Is tell me about your former family business, because one of the things you mentioned previously before we got on the air is your family actually went over through their own hostile takeover, right? And so tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, we're living that actually at the moment. It's coming to an end. So, um, and it relates very much back to your private equity question. So, we saw an opportunity here to, my dad is in his early 70s. We sat down as a family and tried to draft up an intelligent exit strategy that would work for a multi-generation business to carry it on. And we went along and hired an investment banker to try to go out and find the capital that we needed. The business was pretty highly leveraged to a point where it was uncomfortable and certainly holding us back. It was definitely a bottleneck to growth. And as any entrepreneur knows, removing bottlenecks as they pop up is kind of the secret sauce. To me, it's one of those things that if you can continuously do that, you're likely going to make it. And one of the hardest bottlenecks to remove is being a highly leveraged business, especially in the environment we're in now, where interest rates are up and you've got to service that debt. And so we took this approach that, look, we've got to restructure the balance sheet of the business. We brought in the one of the top investment banking firms, and we set out in middle of 2023 to find our private equity partner. And along the way, we ended up packaging up to try to reduce the debt in the business. We packaged up one of our divisions and sold that off to one of a strategic competitor in our industry that we're friendly with. That helped to keep the lenders on board as we were working towards a payback plan here to deleverage the business. And this is where sort of the hostile takeover story really starts to develop. And that started to happen in mid 2024. If any of the listeners out there have gone through an investment banking process before, they're really in there to help you smarten up your books, make the company marketable, help work on information memorandums and all the materials you need to solicit a sophisticated private equity investor, including what returns are going to get and some of that stuff that you touched on. And we had a number of interested parties, but at the end of the day, you've got to pick a horse and ride with it. And we got down, pretty typical story, I think. We got down to the final two, and they were both pretty similar in structure. And you kind of have to flip a coin and make a pick. And when we did that, this is where I think we really got ourselves into the situation that we are in now, which is when you go exclusive with that business. And I have experience selling other businesses before, and I'm very aware and keen to the fact that when you do tie your cart to a single horse, there is a little bit of leverage loss there. But I never expected that we would be living through what we would be living through now. And what happened was the deal negotiations broke down. The terms of the deal that we signed up to kept eroding and changed in many different ways. And I think that's a very common story. I think up to this part, that's probably not uncommon. You pick a horse, you ride with it, and it doesn't turn out at the lawyers drafting up the paperwork are drafting up something completely different. And so we decided to disengage in those conversations, and we said goodbye to that company and broke off talks and set off to continue our own organic restructuring and deleveraging of the balance sheet. And I won't get into that strategy, but it involved a number of different things that we were underway, additional taking out some debt with new debt, maybe selling off some assets of the business. And lo and behold, this business went and bought the debt of our senior lender, bought the debt of our mezzanine secondary lender. So now they are the creditors to the business. They called the loans on the business, put the business into foreclosure, and have started what is this sales process where they're a stalking horse bid and bid the value of the debt that they bought for a much reduced price. And it's sort of unbelievable every time I have to tell the story that it happened, because if I was on your show back in September or August, I would be telling you about a 3x growth plan that we had put together with this group. And it just didn't work out that way. And one of the biggest, I won't say regrets, I'll say lessons learned, has been, when you are a distressed borrower, like in our case we were out of covenant with our lenders, but working very cordial and cooperative with them, very open and transparent. That's something I recommend for any entrepreneur and business owner. You're going to get farther by being an open book and telling them about everything in the business: collections, new contracts, working capital needed, all of that stuff. They actually lent us more money during the time that we needed. We paid it back once receivables came in, cash came in. But yeah, I never thought that this could happen to us, and unfortunately, it has. So being a distressed entrepreneur, an entrepreneur in charge of a distressed business, these are the things that can happen. When you some of the things out of your control, and introducing those folks to our lenders ended up being contributing to the situation we find ourselves in, which is this hostile takeover is going to be wrapped up here in the next couple of weeks. And this business I started over 16 years ago, I am no longer going to own as of the middle of February.
Oh, man, like, it's interesting because you read these things, right, folks? I went to grad school. You read about them in the books and things of that nature, and debt. It's interesting because back in the day, I think it was like the Bush days, right? No debt is bad debt, right? And in the business world, it's a yes and no, right? Because at the end of the day, you kind of need to take on debt in order for you to scale the business. Like Aaron was mentioning, you're not getting paid for 30 to 90 days, and that's pretty typical in this industry. So essentially, if you're a multi-million dollar project, like this guy mentioned, Aaron mentioned 100 people on the lineman, and that's like $1 million right there. That's 1 million that you're up fronting for 30 to 90 days, right? You're going to have to take on some type of debt in order for you to continue to scale. Now, that's a lot of businesses have that issue where cash flow is actually the biggest hindrance to scaling, right? And so then they're kind of almost forced into this corner. In order for you to continue to scale, if you want to go international or beyond the state borders or whatever, you're going to have to bring on more capital. Well, the banks, you already kind of debted out the banks, so now you have to look at private equity, and even though, because the plans are always there, but it's, again, you still need capital investments in order for you to kind of continue to move forward, right? You can't anticipate or expect to grow if you're still out of your garage. You can't make $1 million business staying in the garage, right? Eventually, you're gonna have to go to a shop, and that shop, when you have to go, right, continue to build up, and so, but you kind of have to have that money to get to that shop. However, you forgot that inside the garage, you also had to buy the computer, you had to buy the internet, you had to buy the guard. So all these other bills, right, that you still have to do just to maintain the garage business, right? Knowing that once you get into the shop business, it will continue to grow. So it's unfortunate that there are individual. I'd say predators. I'm going to be a kind of just transparent. I kind of feel like that's the way it is. It's a little predatorial, that they kind of do this to businesses. In fact, there's folks, I'll tell you right now, there's also these things, check your websites. There are people that go around, there are AI systems now that will scan your website to try to see if you are not in line with any regulations, and then they'll sue you. And they'll try to take over your business, try to take over your website, especially if you're like an LLC. They'll kind of drain you pretty quickly, and this is a telling story, right? Of a cautionary story. Just be cautious. But Aaron, I would love to kind of hear. You kind of came out of you're coming out of the flames, right? You're coming out of the rubble, and now you mentioned, you're kind of a distressed business. How have you now, as you're thinking forward, what are some ways, some creative ways, like especially since you've now lived it, what are some ways that distressed business can leverage creative financial options to restore success?
Yes. Um, I it was shocking to me, the lack of content on the internet around this sort of situation: hostile takeover, distressed business. hostile takeover of a distressed business. I think there is some embarrassment, or there's some maybe pride associated with it, and people don't want to talk about that and tell their story. I do want to tell that story because I don't want to see anybody go through what we've gone through. And so I think your question is a great question, because there are, again, not to sound cliche, but if you don't quit, you can't fail. And even, you always have time. And even if your business is distressed, and distress can come from you're offside with your lender. You made a great example about trying to scale up out of your garage, and how are you going to find the cash to do that? It's sort of embracing that. And it doesn't have to be an embarrassing, it's very natural for a business to not have abundant cash and scaled systems like ready for you to go. I mean, that's the challenge that most growing businesses face. So creative financing is, I think, really something that is underrated. And we've used it extensively across the years. And I can give you some really good examples of that. So there's a product out there called factoring, and that's where you can take your receivables. So let's say that you've landed a contract with XYZ company, and that contract has a certain amount of value to it. Boom, you've got to start spending costs. You've either got to buy products, materials, you've got to hire people. Your costs, and your payroll is regular, the utility bill is due when it's due. And yet, depending on your collections, you might not see that money for 30, 60, 90 days. Factoring is something that can live if you already have existing operating facility or debt, a bank facility in your business. It lives complementary beside it. Yes, it is expensive in terms of if you look at the annual interest over the year, but this is the way I look at it. I look at it like, what sort of enterprise value am I creating by satisfying this customer, the potential to win repeat business from this customer again? All I got to do is find the cash to do this project, and I know I've got a conveyor belt of more work coming behind. I don't mind spending a little bit of a higher interest on that. And interest is a tax deductible item for people who are into tax planning. So that's one of them. Factoring is something that has really helped us. When I mentioned that project before that we did in northern Alaska, that was a project that had factoring on it. I mean, the helicopters and all that stuff alone, just to mobilize that project, was a 7-figure bill. And so that helped us with that. So that's one of them. The other one is in service businesses like this, especially when you have repeat customers in an area, that means you usually have repeat vendors that you're using. And everybody has a different leadership philosophy and how they run their business. One of the things I try to do, and we've tried to do, it's part of what we call the Rokstad secret sauce, is whether you are staff in the company or you are a subcontractor to a company, you're staff of a subcontractor that we're hiring, we try to, those people come under our safety system. We treat them all like they're a Rokstad person. And using those relationships with your vendors, and sometimes, they're eager to grow too. And a lot of these companies have supplier financing set up or things like that. And I find all you have to do is ask, it's a lunch, it's a coffee. Hey, I'm going to get this project from XYZ Co. It means I can do this amount of business with you, but you know what? I've got a cash flow problem. Can I, instead of paying you in 30 or 60 days, can I get you 90 days or 120 days? Or how can we figure this out a little bit? Most people, most vendors, if it's related to growth, are keen to try to figure that out. And I've had guys go away, talk to their CFO, they'll come into the office, they'll have a proposal, and we just sit back and say, wow, this was better than what we were going to ask for. What you've offered was way better than what we were going to ask for. And so it's just about embracing that, taking on a business that might not organically fit into your financial picture. If you can break out of the box and try to figure out ways to do it, those were a couple different examples. That's a great way to unlock enterprise value and satisfy the hell out of your clients along the way.
Yeah, I love the recommendation of building the relationship with the manufacturers and vendors, because at the end of the day, if when you're, especially when you're talking about sustainable growth, those individuals want to see your sustainable growth because they have sustainable growth, right? Because you're their client. So at the end of the day, your success becomes their success, right? That's a true definition of trickle down economics. Like that is it at its best, truly. Now, Aaron, I first and foremost, I got to tell you, I have no doubt in my mind that you are going to rise out of this like a fucking phoenix, to be honest with you. Call it whatever you want, but I'm gonna start calling it the Rokstad secret sauce as well, because I truly envision you just, this is obviously not something a lot of companies probably even heard about, let alone gone through, because to be honest with you, probably not a lot of companies have made it to the point where they're even worthy of a takeover. Sorry, I'm not trying to dispute or trying to diminish any people's, but again, you kind of have to be at a level of a value that somebody's willing to kind of go through that process, because that's also not very cheap. Again, these individuals have to go out and purchase all of your debt from other lenders, and then they leverage that over you and say, hey, we are now your creditor. We're going to go ahead and say, not only are we a creditor, but all those loans that you thought were due in 3 or 190 days, they're due today, right now, 24 hours, or else we're closing. And that's how they take it over. So it's like, even though you had this plan with your former lenders, right, now you have a new creditor because they went and purchased all that debt. And so it's again, fascinating story. Shitty it happened. I'm sorry. It sucks. I'm baffled that it happened. And it's again, folks, you got to have I think a little bit of credit to Aaron here. You built a company also worthy of somebody even wanting to take it over, because you built a powerhouse. And not only just a powerhouse, but it seems like you also built up your employees as well. You had over 1,000 employees, over $500 million privately held powerhouse. Truly power and energy sector. And like you mentioned, you just kind of wanted to make sure they had that Rokstad special sauce, which I think
Yes.
you guys definitely have. So, like, Aaron, if people are interested in learning more about you, I know you mentioned you got another business hopefully on the pipeline. I definitely see that entrepreneurial spirit in you. So I don't think we have heard the last of you yet, sir. If they're interested in learning more about you, want to contact you, how can they connect with you?
Absolutely. My website, aaronrokstad.com, or Aaron Rokstad on Instagram is where I'm most of my traffic goes through.
I love it. And again, folks, you can subscribe to the Shades of E. Go ahead and subscribe to it, theshadesofE.com. Go ahead and hit that subscription button on newsletter. All this information will be there. You can also visit us at the Shades of E on all the social sites. This video will be available on YouTube. It'll be available a week early for those Patreon members. So $5 a month. You'll get all the access to these videos, as well as transcriptions, all sorts of fun stuff. And then again, there will be individual web pages with Aaron's information. So Aaron, again, thank you so much. Is there any last words you have before we leave?
There is. I prepared this before coming on because I was hoping you were going to ask this. Um, I really appreciate the sentiment and the confidence in the future. And um, I believe that doing the right thing is always the right thing. I have a number of customers who are definitely not happy with this current situation, and a number of staff obviously are shocked of what's going on. And so the what is a business other than the bylaws and the incorporation documents, etc., that actually make up the LLC or the S corp or whatever it is that you've got. But that isn't it. Every business has a heart and every business has a soul, and that can't be bought or sold, and it also can't be taken away. And so, while yes, I've had my fair share of sleepless nights, I've had my fair share of embarrassment and regret. I am now at the place where I am so confident that of what is going to happen in 25 and 26. A lot of that has to do with the tailwinds in this industry and just the changes I alluded to at the beginning. But the I know if I was on your show a year from now, I would be sitting here and saying this was a blessing in disguise, because look at what we've been able to go and create. And that's what I'm getting after every day. And just again, appreciate the opportunity to come on and tell the story here, Gabriel. I really enjoyed my time here, and thank you.
Man, Aaron's got me ready to run through a wall right here, folks. I'm excited for you guys. Again, I have utmost confident that you are going to be successful in the future. I know you've been building it, and again, you're just continuing to grind, and you don't stop, right? You continue to look forward, and I really love what you said, because at the end of the day, folks, you can't buy a culture, right? You can't buy the value proposition of the culture, and that's a true north, and that kind of comes from the founders, because once those founders leave and that culture leaves, that all that energy leaves, right? You're not just buying a business, but you're truly buying a culture. And so when you take out pieces of the culture, it's very difficult. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. They'll tell you that in any business school all the time. So make sure you treat your employees well. Make sure you're treating them the way you really want them to be treating your consumers, but also make sure you treat them the way you want your business to be remembered. Because again, that your business is a part of you. It's your value proposition. It's going to be the way people remember you kind of moving forward. So, Aaron, I'm really glad you said that. I'm really excited again, Aaron. Aaron, I appreciate you so much, folks. Again, AaronRokstad.com. You can find this information on theshadesofE.com. Go ahead and hit that subscription button. Thank you, and have a great night.